Good evening, all, and welcome to a new episode of Carta de Vineri on this beautiful sunny, where I am, at least Friday evening. I don't know when we ended up on the 20th of September, but we are now here with a different type of meeting with Iolanda Costide, and I will hand over to Andra, who will introduce us for tonight.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Iolanda, for accepting our invitation. So tonight is a slightly different setup. In the past, we were able to interview the authors of the books that we had been discussing. Tonight is slightly different in the sense that Iolanda is the trustee of a trust who has published a book, and she's here to tell us about that book, which is a monograph of Paul Neagu. Iolanda herself is an architect. She has practiced between 1977 and 2023 at Atelier 16 and then NTA 16 Architects. Since 1977, she's also been a human rights activist. She originally moved to Western Europe, she received political asylum to Western Europe in 1972. Between 1986 and 1996, she was the president of the British-Romanian Association, Asociația Culturală a Românilor din Anglia. She is a close friend of Paul Neagu, who is the artist we are discussing tonight. And she is here in her capacity as a trustee of Paul Neagu's estate in the UK. There are two other trustees, Henry Lidiate and Șerban Cantacuzino. And last but not least...
if I may interrupt, they were the original trustees. Now
Okay.
we have another co-trustee. Not that Șerban has died in the meantime, and Henry withdrew. So I have a new co-trustee at the moment. One
Apologies.
of Paul Neagu's, no, that's fine. One of
Thank
Paul
you.
Neagu's nephews, Paul Chukor.
And last but not least, Iolanda is this correct? A member of the Senate for the Romanian National Liberal Party?
Yes, a member of the National Liberal Party Senate.
Yes. I see. Yeah.
Old and wise men, and as you can see, also old and wise women. Which is good for Romania. It sounds.
Thank you. So it sounds like we're going to have a very, very rich perspective from Iolanda tonight. Thank you again for joining us. And
it's a pleasure.
Over to you, Nicola, to introduce the book.
Yeah, so thank you, Andra. Just wanted to give a bit more information about Paul Neagu for people who don't already know him and not familiar with his work. This is information largely taken from the Paul Neagu Estate's brilliant website, which I suggest you all visit. Paul Neagu was a British-Romanian sculptor, painter, performance artist, teacher, and poet who made a crucial contribution to the development of conceptual art in Britain and after 1990 also in Romania. As a teacher, he had a great impact on those who later became some of Britain's leading sculptors, including Tony Cragg, Anthony Gormley, and Anish Kapoor. Neagu was born in Bucharest, raised in Timișoara, and graduated from the Academy of Fine Arts in Bucharest in 1963. In 1969, he travelled to the UK following an invitation to Edinburgh, from Edinburgh gallerist and impresario Richard DeMarco, and he subsequently immigrated to the UK in 1970, settling in London, where he lived for the next 34 years, exhibiting widely and teaching at art schools. In 1972, he founded the Generative Art Group, which consisted of himself plus 4 other fictitious members, each representing different parts of his psyche: poet, philosopher, painter, designer. Neagu's diverse artistic practice encompassed performance, body art and installation, sculpture, drawing, painting, printmaking, and poetry. His work is represented in several UK public collections, including the Henry Moore Foundation in Leeds, the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art in Edinburgh, and the Tate, the V&A, and the Arts Council collection in London. And now to briefly introduce the book that we're discussing this evening, Paul Neagu, the monograph, which is published by JRP Editions in collaboration with the Paul Neagu Estate and is edited by Magda Radu, George Scholhammer, and together with assistant editor Diana Ursen. And the monograph is the first major publication to examine the artist's oeuvre. As I said, it was commissioned by the Paul Neagu Estate. The publication analyzes established and prevalent narratives which are focused on the work Neagu produced in the early 1970s, shedding light particularly on the performative aspect of his practice. By broadening the frame of reference and going beyond the discussion of familiar tropes, this volume offers new interpretations of concepts, themes, and cycles of work central to his oeuvre, such as palpable art, the concept of anthropocosmos, the hyphen, his major sculptural invention, and later projects of visual hermeneutics. Involving extensive archival research, the monograph covers multiple facets of Neagu's practice, drawing attention to the contemporary perspectives on his singular artistic and cultural trajectory, while at the same time deepening its historical contextualization. And yes, so thank you. That was just a brief introduction to the artist and the monograph. And now we'll be going into sort of the discussion portion of the evening.
Thank you very much, Nicola. So let's try to start at the beginning. How did you meet Paul Neagu, Iolanda?
I met Paul Neagu in the mid-70s. I was participating at a seminar on architecture and art, and he was present too. And my then surname ended in SQ. It was Stranescu. And at the first break, he came over to meet my then husband and myself to ask if we are Romanian. And that was the start of what became a very close friendship over the next 3 decades.
Thank you very much.
That's it.
Follow-up question.
Sorry, I have to specify that I'm a very concise speaker and writer, so my questions will be short. Don't wait.
Okay, thank you. So in that case, follow-up question, you met Paul Neagu through complete chance, and then years later, you became a trustee of his estate. Can you talk us through a little bit about that that journey, how you became a trustee, what happened in between?
As I mentioned, we became very close friends. So we were in contact socially frequently, and over the years, I also became involved in certain architectural projects with him, as well as becoming a director of his Generative Art Trust, which was a charitable organization, registered limited. And both Șerban Cantacuzino and myself were directors of this trust. So I think that I also always had and felt a great affinity to his art. I liked it very much. It's still close to my own emotional makeup. And obviously he felt that. So I think that in the end, it must have been a question of trust, because I'm an architect and design is art, but I'm not an art professional in the sense in which Nicola is, for instance, yes. So I think that's what it was. It was a matter of trust, I suppose.
I've really enjoyed reading the fantastic monograph. It's such an impressive publication. I don't have it with me, but I think Serena or Andrea does. But yeah, I was reading in the foreword, and you talk about your close friendship with Paul, and you use the phrase inspiring ups and dramatic downs about the sort of journey that your friendship went through. And I just wondered if you might elaborate a little on that, on the use of that phrase and on the kind of nature of your friendship, which you
Yes.
already mentioned was very close.
I will elaborate on it, but we're getting very much into the personal a little bit here. But anyway, I mean, we visited him very often in his studio and his home. And I was very often invited to his openings, and he invited me to go with him to certain events, meetings, cultural meetings, if you want. And that was the highlights, the inspiring part of it. He was generally a very generous person, but could be also very vengeful. And I must say that we did go through 2 periods when we didn't speak to each other for about 2 years every time, but then we did make up every time. So these were the lows. Right. I mean, that's about it. Yes. So as in every personal relationship, you know, you have your quarrel, you make up, yes,
highs and lows everywhere.
Exactly.
It's part of life. Going back to the estate, like yourself, I'm fairly concise and to the point. So could you tell us a little bit more about the estate and what the aims are? How did it come about?
Well, to start with, it all started with a will. So Paul made a will, and he split what were to become the estates. He split the estate in 2: the Romanian part with Romanian executors and trustees, with executive responsibility within Romania only, and then the UK estate. And the will named 3 people as the executors of the UK estate, with worldwide reach, executive reach. And the UK estate, the 3 people were myself, Șerban Cantacuzino, who was an architect too, but then he's best known to the English public as the Secretary General of the Royal Fine Art Commission for many years, for 2 decades. And Henry Lydiat, who is a lawyer, and he invented the term art law. So he specialized in art law. And I think that the composition of the group of the UK executors is self-evident. Șerban was opening doors because he had, I mean, both in the Romanian, if you want, as a background, obviously, he comes from the voivode families of the Cantacuzinos, so both in the Romanian circles, but also the contacts in the British world of art because of his involvement with the Royal Fine Art Commission, and Henry also, obviously, Henry with his knowledge of what the legal problems around the arts and copyright and other matters connected, because art is, one has to have legal skills nowadays in the art world. You have to be very careful. So that was very useful to start with. And unfortunately, Șerban died some 4 years ago, I think, now. And then 2 years later, Henry withdrew. And we had already asked Paul Ciucur, who is a nephew of Paul Neagu, to join us a few years before that happened. And he also happens to be one of the original 3 Romanian trustees. So it was good to have this bridge, human bridge, between the 2 parts, because we've encountered some legal problems because of this split. And I think that we've dealt with them, sorted them out as as best as we could.
Sounds
Do
fascinating
you want to know
indeed.
any more about the structure of the estate?
Yeah.
I don't know how far your question.
As far as you're comfortable sharing,
Or
essentially.
perhaps
So
more
if,
about the aims,
yeah,
what the
Well, the aims, I mean, very simply put, to continue Paul Neagu's legacy, to make sure that his work remains known and comes back into public focus, because a lot of the 70s artists, the artists that became very famous in the 70s, which was his case too, although being an immigrant, as it were, uh, were lost and forgotten a little bit over the young British artists wave. So it was important to make sure that he's not forgotten. And in fact, in the last few years, his relevance came to the foreground again, particularly through his performance art. So new generations seem to be very inspired by his performance art period. So otherwise, beyond this direct legacy, if you want, keep alive the notion of generative arts, which he formed a group of affinities, artists with whom he had affinity, and he defined them as artists that are generative in their nature, in the nature of the work, and their work is generative. So he declared an affinity with them. And I'm reading now from a manifesto of the Generative Art Trust: Kandinsky, Klee, Malevich, Tatlin, Mondrian, Brâncuș, Roscoe, Hepworth, Chilida, the Smithsons, Kapoor, and so on. So the idea is also to keep alive this idea of generative art. And we also are trying as much as possible to support the research into Paul Neagu and to make available the material that we have, the information that we have, that is contained in the archive, the estate archives. And the sources of information concerning Paul Neagu are both to be found both in the Tate archive, but we also have a lot of material. So support the further study of his work.
fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Returning in a way to the original topic of discussion, which is the monograph.
Yeah.
I mean, from what you told us about the background of both the personal relationship and the trust itself, it really sounds like a work of love, right?
It has to be.
Yes.
Yes.
Can you?
Yes, that's true.
And you were very keen, and I have to point this out, that you were very keen for us to acknowledge all of the contributors to the monograph in the event description and all the publicity that we made for the event. So can you please talk to us a little bit about how the teamwork came, how it happened, how the monograph was put together and delivered and developed with this team of editors and assistant editors and the trust, and all of those relationships which came together to create something wonderful and very, very heavy.
Extremely heavy and big and heavy. Yes, of course. As trustees and as an estate, generally, we don't like to generate the events around Paul Neagu. We prefer to be approached by other people. But this was one happening that we absolutely wanted to achieve and knew that it was necessary, and that was the monograph. So it was important to have first-class editors and editors who were actually steeped in curatorial history and art and knowledge, of course. We did in the end, at the recommendation of Marian Ivan, our gallerist, he's the owner of the Ivan Gallery in Bucharest. We did meet Georg Schollhammer because Marian suggested him as possibly or probably a good one of the good persons to become editor of the monograph. And we met around my dining table here in London with Marian, Georg Schollhammer, and Magda Radu, who had already worked on exhibitions and had researched Paul's work and taught him too at the university in Bucharest. And it all worked out. Magda Radu and Georg Schollhammer got on like a house of fire. And it was decided, and they agreed that they would become the editors of the monograph. It was very much left, again, this principle of ours of approaching every project at arm's length. It was very much left to them to then find the contributors, the essay writers. We didn't suggest or impose anybody. So the contributors were very much at their suggestion. The design also, designer in Vienna. The publishing house too. So JRP Editions became involved through Georg's former contacts, and he had worked with them. And slowly the editors started researching this very vast and very deep pond that is Paul Neagu. And in fact, a few months into the research, after the January 2019 meeting, they came up with the idea of the retrospective. And I'm maybe jumping a little bit because I know that that's one of your next questions, because they both felt that it was very important to have a platform, a visual platform, physical platform for the readers, for the public to be able to refer to once they had the monograph in their hand. So it became a two-track project, both the monograph and the retrospective. Do you want me to go more into more detail? I mean, obviously, as the estate commissioned the monograph, as I said at the beginning, so it's one of the only events that really we were the generators of. So because of that, I obviously worked and signed and put together with our lawyers, put together all the contracts pertaining to the monograph with the editors, with all the collaborators, with the designers, a raft of photographers, because while we have a sort of photographic ID of the works that we have in our ownership, we didn't have, they were not very well, up to publication standard photographed. So because of the retrospective, that in a little bit complicated the illustration part of the monograph, because we actually in the end had 4 photographers, including one in Vaduz who photographed certain items that were 2D items that were in the retrospective, another one in Vienna who photographed the 3D works while they were in Graz in the second iteration of the retrospective. So all the contracts pertaining, I had to do all that. And in addition to that, what was extremely important for the monograph, as opposed to the essays that had been published before on the margin or to illustrate as catalogs of various exhibitions, it spurred us on to document the archive and to photograph it all, and in order to be able to make it available to all the essay writers who are all over the world. So we put everything online, and that took a lot of time too. So plus the pandemic, which complicated everybody's life. So it took about 4 years for the monograph to be fully researched, written, for all the illustrations to be put together, for us to make available all the information, including a lot of photographs that were taken by Paul Neagu himself, because he obsessively documented his work, both in written, in writing, and with photographs of his installations. So
Wow.
that
Yeah, I was actually going to ask how long the book took to put together.
as a trustee, as a commissioner, I told them that we are delighted that they are interested in putting together a retrospective, but they are not allowed to delay the monograph. Sure enough, the retrospective was at its third iteration in Timișoara before the monograph was ready to be published. So
Yeah.
I will say that much for my strength of persuasion.
And did the launch of the archival materials online, did that coincide with the launch of the book, or?
No, it wasn't. We started as a trickle. We started putting it together before that. I think it was important. Again, we actually to set up the site, the website altogether. So that also came as a consequence of us archiving the material that we have. And yes.
And everything's now there on
producing an inventory.
Well,
not everything, no. I mean, we haven't really touched correspondence. So we've only covered the material that was put together by Paul himself, but we haven't touched the correspondence, his correspondence before dying, and there is much to be learned from his library, his books. He had a vast library, and we have that too. And I think it will have to be listed and an inventory of the library too. Some of the books have margin notes made by Paul, so that may and is bound to be insightful too for researchers. So I think that there is still a lot to be done.
And where is all this stored? You mentioned the library, and
we have it stored in a specialist storage place, specialist art storage place.
Back to the work you produced. I mentioned already in my brief introduction the UK collections in which Paul's work is represented, but I was wondering where else in the world people might be able to see his work.
Well, I think that if people go to our website, they're going to see a list of a lot of places. But there is a National Museum in Tokyo, for instance. There are, we were approached after the monograph was published by MAMCO in Geneva. They have works in their collection too. So we keep on discovering museums and institutions that have their work. Some art collections by big businesses like the Contact collection have his works. The National Museum of Bucharest has a lot of works because he actually gifted them quite a lot of works. Yes, there is a big list. Honestly, I would recommend it's in one word, for lowercase, paulneagu.com. And there is a lot of information there if the listeners want to go and peruse, including all the places where the work is to be found. But the Tate has a lot of his works, and I wish there was a permanent display of at least some of the works that they have in their collection. There was a temporary display, a performer and participant at Tate Modern, which had an exhibition of his work too, which comes from their collection. And that was up between 2020 and 2023. But I wish they had some in Tate Britain too, because he's a British artist. So in fact, there should be some of his work on permanent display. And I hope we'll get there soon enough.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
I was going to ask you if we could potentially elaborate on the legacy, but thinking a little bit at the setting. Oh, sorry, Andrea, did you want to ask a question?
Sorry, just, if
Go
I may
ahead.
really quickly, because
Yeah.
I just had a realization and I'm very ashamed. So confession time. You can see Paul Neagu in Timișoara city centre in front of the Orthodox Cathedral.
Oh, you're
I
talking
had
about the
only
public
just,
sculptures.
yes, I have only just realized that a sculpture that I've known for more than half my life
Do you
is by
come from
Paul
Timișoara?
Neagu.
Do you come from
Yes,
Timișoara? Yeah.
yes.
That was commissioned as a memorial to the people who died
Yes.
in the revolution in
And
Timișoara.
I've only just realized when I looked at the website that is him. And looking through the monograph, I thought, oh, these drawings look awfully familiar and very, very, like they remind me of something. So yes, for those of you who can get to Timișoara, that's where you can see Paul Neagu. And if you didn't know that's Paul Neagu, go and see it after the interview and have a look. And I do remember that it was. There was quite a bit of debate about its artistic style when it was unveiled. It wasn't quite what a lot of people expected.
It's an interesting one because it's one of his stations, catalytic stations, and it's actually the A cross, which is a little bit of a hyphen, but with a cross over it into the composition. And he has mounted it upside down on that in Timișoara from the way it's usually displayed. And the way it was mounted, it very much looks like part of it is like a television screen. Not that he thought about it necessarily, but it was also, in 1989, 1990, the uprising in Romania, I hate to call it revolution because in the end it wasn't a revolution. The uprising in Romania was very much won by television as well. So somehow, the cross in the A cross is obviously making reference to the people who died, but the square bit rounded off, which could be part of the hyphen, the top of the hyphen as well, is like a television screen. So one can make a lot of connections which are not necessarily his, a lot of references, but I think that it's very rich.
So it's really interesting that Viorica Toma is asking a question in the chat and would like to hear more about the public art in Romania and the UK, and wondering if the trust tries to make it more visible. That's precisely where I was going to go with my question. We're in a virtual environment right now, we're talking about museums all around the world, and that's absolutely fantastic to hear. But equally, we're at a time in where virtual reality becomes a lot more present. And I was wondering, are any of these actual virtual exhibitions that can be viewed with, VR and all that kind of stuff?
Well, you have two public sculptures of Neagu's to start with in the UK. So you have the Edge Runner, which is another one of the catalytic stations in the Angel, in a small park near the Angel. And it was placed there as part of the Cultural Olympics in 2012.
Oh.
And then you have the Triple Starhead, which was meant to be a public sculpture in Charing Cross, but that project fell through for very much because of bureaucracy. And for instance, Westminster planners decided that it would distract the drivers in the traffic, while the planners were part of the committee who organized the competition and chose the winning scheme, which was Paul's Triple Starhead. So it wandered from the Goodwood Park, Sculpture Park, to Ottawa in front of the British Commission there. And when it came back to the UK from Ottawa, we agreed with the Milton Keynes Parks to place it there. So the Triple Starhead now is in Milton Keynes on a hill overlooking Furzon Lake. So that's the UK. He had a lot of proposals for other public sculptures, but unfortunately they are still virtual. And in Romania, you have the one in Timișoara, and you had the Century Cross, which was a disc with a cross cut through it, which was placed in the Charles de Gaulle Square, and the whole configuration and its form and the expression were tying the sculpture to the triumphal arch and the statue of the aviators in Bucharest. But unfortunately, the Bucharest town hall decided to rip it out of there and move it somewhere near the Herăstrău Lake, in front of the Chinese embassy, which has no connection or reason, because they wanted to do underground works and then underground tunnel under the Charles de Gaulle Square, which Romania being as it is, of course, never happened. They're still to maybe dig it. So those are the two available in Romania, public sculptures. And the fifth one is a sculpture in a sculpture park in Guilin in China. So he won a competition alongside other artists, and they went to China and stayed there for months, and their works, their projects, the sculptures were manufactured there in loco, and it's still there to be seen. And it's a form of a hyphen, the rounded hyphen, which for anybody who went to see the exhibition, the art and architecture exhibition, Nicola, I think that you went there, didn't you? At the Institute, Romanian Cultural Institute.
Oh, yes, of course,
You
yeah.
went to see the exhibition.
Yeah.
The timber model was actually a model of the sculpture that is in Guilin, except that it's not sitting on the rounded part of it, it's put like that, upright. So the five public sculptures.
Excellent.
I can't believe I didn't know about the one in Angel. I feel ashamed about not knowing about that one.
Fine, do go, do see it, and it's full of scribbles. And
Oh.
Islington Council does nothing to actually clean it up.
Oh.
So
Yeah, well, don't
yeah.
get me started about Islington Council. So
They were really very pleased to have the sculpture, actually. The culture
they should be.
department, the culture officer really was very, very pleased. Because they
What's
didn't
the
pay
name?
for anything. They only paid for the you know, the plaque with the announcement on it. So that was all.
What's the name of the park?
Ah, goodness. It's the one and only park near the Angel. I'm sorry, I can't remember. I can't
Okay.
remember the name.
I'll look it up.
But it's not the one that runs along the canal. It's the one that is, there is a technical high school that looks over the park. So from the Angel, you either have access to a park that then takes you to the Regent's Canal. So it's not that one. It's the other one.
Okay, I'll look it up. Be sure to visit.
Not very precise, but for Londoners, I think it may become clear once you go there.
Is
Sure.
it Owens Fields by any chance?
Sorry?
Goswell. Owens Fields, Goswell
Yes,
Road.
it is. Thank you, Sarina. I think that you probably Googled it.
That's
speedily.
exactly where I am. Speedy
Good one.
Gonzalez.
Very good. Yes.
Thank you. On the subject of retracing Paul Neagu and finding Paul, where can we find this amazing book? And thank you very much, Iolanda, for making it available to us to help us prepare. That's the
Okay.
Milton
I mean, it's
Keynes
still a
sculpture, by the way.
little bit
So for
wonderful.
anyone
Yes,
who
you
wants
open
to
it.
see it,
Yeah, you open it on the triple starhead in Milton Keynes.
yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I mean, it's not the first mishap. Unfortunately, the distributors who are supposed to distribute it in the UK went bankrupt in January of this year, 2024. And a new company took over in July, and they're still getting their act together. I think that many people will know that publishing is not going through an easy period of time, and that was a difficult one. So I think that you can find it online. You can get it online for the time being.
I was wondering what's next for the trust and if there are any upcoming projects that you could tell us about. I know you mentioned wanting to see his work exhibited at Tate Britain.
Well, as I told you, we don't generate events. Personally, I think it's much better if people come to you with proposals, because if we would generate them, you could have easily the comments, and people are not always very well disposed. They organize it again because nobody else is interested in doing something. But also, I think that if we were to generate it always, in the end, you'd show the same thing because it's only that much. So you really need the input from other people and a lot of points of view. And that's why I think the monograph was brilliantly thought and done, because it has 11 essays in it, which is a lot much richer than if Georg and Magda would have written it all themselves. So we don't. As you know, the last event was the exhibition in Mamco between March and June, and again they approached us. I've seen them by the curator, Elisabeth Jobin. I've seen the monograph. It's lovely. We are having, they always have 4 separate exhibitions per quarter. And she wanted to do a Neagu exhibition as one of them. And they did. So I think the editors want to organize another debate on the monograph in New York, and that should be forthcoming. I hope in November or December, or maybe later, but they managed to do that. So, I mean, from the very beginning, the first exhibition after his death was organized in 2009. And again, at the curator's instigation. And it's been like that since then. The major exhibition at the Honeymoon Institute in 2015, again, at their instigation, they approached us. The same with the retrospective. Okay, the editor's imagination was lit, if you want, by the research for the monograph, but still it was their suggestion. And they invited Friedemann Marsch, who was the founding director of the Kunstmuseum Liechtenstein. And he was still director then, and they invited him in, I think it was April or May 2019, and suggested the retrospective to him. And Friedemann was really immediately bowled over and programmed the exhibition, the retrospective there, which should have taken place in 2020. For obvious reasons, it didn't, and it opened in 2021. So what we do, we lend the work, we make sure that all the insurance is in place, paid by the instigators of the events and the projects, that the works are in a condition in which they can be exposed, presented. I've had very good experience on that account also with both the Kunstmuseum Liechtenstein and the Bruseum in the Neue Galerie in Graz. They conserved some of the works. They did some conservation work on them. Obviously, they asked us, would you agree? We recommend this. And this is fantastic. So every time there is a sort of partnership established with new institutions. And yeah. But with the contents of any of the exhibitions, we never imposed something, or we never said, we want you to present these works, or we want you to do it that way, because I think it would be very limiting. Very limiting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And returning briefly to Timișoara, there was recently a retrospective as part of the European City of Culture Paul Neagu retrospective.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that exhibition, how it came about, the public that it was aimed at, because Paul was born in Timișoara, but most of his activities were in the UK.
Yeah.
So yes, if you could retrospectively,
sure, absolutely. Again, it was the retrospective. So it was the same retrospective in its third iteration. Obviously, the curators had, with each new location, had to look at the spaces and adjust the composition and the installations to fit the spaces. And the same was true for Timișoara. Because he was brought up in Timișoara, and because Timișoara became a European capital of culture, somehow it seemed incredible that the retrospective shouldn't be shown there too. But obviously the NART, the National Museum of Art in Timișoara, the spaces are very small, so they had to completely rethink the retrospective for that space. And it opened in December 21. So from Graz, the works went directly to Timișoara with a short period of storage, both in Graz and in Timișoara before the exhibition opened. It opened in December. So before, it was really the first exhibition as part of the cultural event. And then also, that's why we chose to launch the monograph there in February 2023, because it was while the retrospective was still running. Unfortunately, Georg Schollhammer was a little bit ill during that period, so it was curated by Friedemann Walsh, Magda Radu, and the Van Ene, the curator from NART, the local curator. And yes, I mean, it was different, but it was the same but different. Yeah. That's it. I'm done.
Fabulous.
Couple more questions.
Yes.
Go on.
No, sorry, Serena, after you.
That's all right. Regarding, art and politics is my most favorite point here. What are your thoughts on Paul Neagu's mantra? Art must give up its purely visual aesthetic if it wants to survive.
Well, it was very provocative at its time, obviously, and it did shake the establishment. It did. So, I mean, he did his forms of expression. This is why he also set up the fictitious generative art group, because he wanted to be able to express himself in different ways, different forms. The monograph doesn't mention poetry, of course. He wrote poetry as well. It didn't mention architecture, his architecture projects, which is why we organized the exhibition in June here in London. So yes, it was very much of the day and very much in the in the then concept of shaking up everything, shaking up society, shaking up politics, shaking up social mores, and shaking up conventional art. But this thing about art needs to be experienced with all five senses. I mean, that was his main idea. In the end, when you come down to it, his edible art decayed. His palpable art is fragile now, and as the retrospective showed, you can't touch it any longer. So it was far from the public. So in the end, is it a museum? Is it a record of what? Maybe it's both. Is it just showing the memory of what had happened, a few decades before? But it's back to the visual because it's too fragile to be experienced in any other way, but in a visual way. So it was of its moment, but that's connected to time too, like music, it comes and goes. So we're back to the visual.
Definitely. Thank you.
I was wondering if we might reflect on the process of Paul's emigration, in the sense that there's a quote from the monograph here. Neagu felt that he and his Romanian artists, such as Ion Bitsen-Ritzi and Peter Jacobi, with whom he travelled to Scotland via Hamburg in the spring of 1969, were treated very much like creatures from outer space. None of us spoke English. Wherever we went, we were treated with limousines and mayors taking us around because we were such unusual guests. That's in Tom Hollett's essay. And also then in relation to the fact that he immigrated to the UK in 1970, and in Yehuda Emmanuel Safran's essay, he says that Paul's exile was never completed, and he remained fundamentally attached to things Romanian. So, yeah, just thinking about that, about immigration, and his and Paul's relationship to Romania and his Romanian identity. Wondered if we might reflect.
I'd say specifically the two quotations that you highlighted. they both refer to his early period in the UK.
Mhm.
And Safran only met him in the beginning, at the beginning of the 70s. Holland refers to that period,
Mhm.
and it describes him as he was then.
Mhm.
But he became an absolute master of the English language. And he also played with the words. I mean, he loved witty word plays. He became very well integrated in society because, I mean, he was, again, a very social person. And I mean, the English public and women particularly fell for his actor good looks. And if you speak now as a historian, if you speak a lot of to a lot of the women that met him at the beginning, I mean, they will always mention his good looks as well. So he was very well integrated, and then of course on the art scene he was the man of the hour. So I think that they both refer to his very early years here.
Mhm.
It's only later, in the later decades, when he was no longer really, I mean, his research, his art investigations, artistic investigations were not really so part of the day's dogma. And he wasn't so well understood towards the end of his life. And I think that that's when he became closer again to his roots, to his Romanian roots. Of course, after 1990, he was able to go back to Romania often again. He was personally instrumental actually in making his work known in Romania because people didn't know of his work. And yeah, he bought property in Argeș County in Valea lui Anache. He made a summer studio there. So it was towards the end of his life that he went back again much to his Romanian roots. But otherwise, his Romanian roots you can feel them in the materiality of his work, of his sculptures, in the wooden sculptures, in the hyphen is a little bit, you know, his father was a cobbler, so his first sculptural forms, he went back to the shape of the last used for cobblers to put their shoes on and to hammer them into shape. So I'd say it's not so much related to the dichotomy between being an exile or not. It's very much more connected to his Romanian roots and all Romanian artists, very often going back to the folk art, Romanian folk art, and finding inspiration in it. So, yeah, I think that's more the reality rather than his being a displaced immigrant in the UK for all of the time that he stayed here. I mean, that's why he was adopted. I mean, he's considered to be a British artist, not a British artist born in Romania. And that's, as far as state is concerned, that's the way he's described, you know. So.
I was just wondering from your own perspective as an architect, how do you respond to the architectural elements of Neagu's practice? We talked about the fact that everybody has their own point of view, and essentially every time we look at a piece of art, we create and recreate it, and we pass it through our own filters.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I mean, from a purely irrational, personal point of view, I like his work very much. I feel very close to it. As an architect, I've worked with him on some of the projects that he was thinking on, maybe building a studio and museum, creative center in Timișoara. So we worked on some of the projects. But as a sculptor, he very much approached his architectural concepts, architectural ideas as a sculptor around the object, and the object that influences and orders the space around it, rather than work on the environment. So it was very much as a singular object. So he still saw architecture through his eyes as a sculpture. Yeah. But innovative ideas, I mean, wonderful. I mean, some of the drawings in the exhibition were organized in June. It would be lovely to be able to build them.
Yeah. Somehow the way you're describing him and what I've seen of his work makes me think, and I know this is, like you said, purely a rational point of view, my own. I'm thinking of Gaudi, but just because it's a completely different style and architecture is being challenged for a different specter.
Yes, but the architecture is not only about objects. I mean, that's the difference. And some of the best architecture, actually, you don't notice. Some of the best architecture blends in its environment. So that's my view as an architect. Obviously, his. So you can't have stars everywhere. Certain singular buildings or architectural constructions are appropriate in certain places, but you can't have every single architectural project be singular. So that's why I said that you're still thinking about architecture from a sculptor's point of view rather than.
Thank you, and apologies. It still takes me a little while to find the unmute button, no matter how many times I use it. We are coming up towards the end of the questions we had prepared, but we do have a question from somebody in the Zoom call. They would like to know whether there are any programs for students or researchers that would enable them to connect with Paul Neagu's work.
There would be. I mean, we had offered grants in the first years. I think it's more a matter of administration. I think that the best way to go about it is to actually go via established institutions like the Henry Moore Institute or the Henry Moore Foundation, and say we would very much like to research his work. Do you have any program that within which we can do that? I mean, the same with Tate. They have both the Henry Moore Institute and Tate had students doing their PhD on Paul Neagu, and they supported the research. So I think that for the time being, it's best to go that way for students of Paul Neagu.
I think I found the link online, so I'll put that in the chat and we can add it to the live as well.
Cool. Thank you very much. I don't know how, but every live interview that I can remember, this question has come up to me in the sequence.
Yes.
And it is the traditional question. So Cartea de Vineri is a book recommendation club. And we're looking for recommendations of books by Romanian authors or books that are somehow connected to Romania. What would you, Iolanda, recommend us to read as part of the Cartea de Vineri project?
My recommendation is a Romanian academic who teaches history of biomedicine in Oxford Brookes. His name is Marius Turda. He is one of the most intelligent contributors to the cultural and political scene these days. He's written particularly on eugenics and racism. and the way in which they influenced political thinking, starting with the 19th century even. And he's highlighting the fact that governments and politicians are still led by those ideas, even the mainstream ones. We're not talking about extreme parties now, either left or right. So you can still find a book that he published in 2010 in English, that's for the English listeners, which is Modernism and Eugenics.
That's the first one that came up when I looked him up.
Yeah. It was published in Romanian as well in 2014 in the collection Historia by Polirom. I'm reading now because I made a few notes because I knew that you are going to ask me that. And it's translated as Eugenism și modernitate, națiune, rasă și biopolitică în Europa, between 1870 and 1950. That's the period covered. And the book comprehensively explores modern Europe's fixation with eugenic programs of racial and national purification. It illustrates ways in which science was put to use for political ends and an obsession with molding and controlling the population of a country and emerging nations. And then you have the latest book published, which is in Romanian, but I have no doubt it may be translated in English as well. He launched it now in 24, again with Polirom, and it's called În căutarea românului perfect, in search of the perfect Romanian. National specificity, racial degeneration, and social selection in modern Romania. And again, to quote Marius, because from a recently published interview in the Review of Democracy, he's saying, if you really want to understand the present, you need to go back to the past. But one should go back to the past in a way that allows the past to speak for itself rather than reinvent it. And again, in politics and in modern organizations, there is the tendency to reinterpret history as it best suits one's object. So again, this latest publication, I'm quoting now from the presentation, yes, it discusses the intersection between eugenics and influence and racism in Romania, in Romanian nation building. It presents the main historical moments that influence the evolution of eugenics and racism, and analyzes the influence of interwar debates around eugenics and racism on socialist and post-socialist Romania. And like very few people, he's a very good writer, both in English and in Romanian. Some people write about interesting subjects, but not so well. He's a very good writer in both languages. So it takes us back to Samuel Beckett, who wrote brilliantly in France when he lived in Paris, but there we are. So it's not very often. It's a rare feat, and he's one of the good writers.
Fantastic.
I can also send you the links. Maybe you want to for the two books. Maybe you want to include them.
Yeah. By all means, thank you very much.
Okay.
Marius Turda is one of the authors on my to-do list.
Well, there you are. Now I recommended his book, and people can buy it and read it, and then you can invite him and talk about it. But it will be so much more relevant for everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it was delightful, really. Thank you very much. It was delightful to have this talk. I made clear from the beginning that I'm not an art specialist, and I think it was very evident during our discussion and the various answers I was able to give you. But it was very good initiative. Congratulations to Dor. I think it's a very good project to have and to be consistent and to keep it going, because the difficulty is not always, the difficulty is not starting a project, but actually to keep it going.
Thank you very much.
That's what the challenge
Thank
is.
you.
Agreed. Absolutely. We really appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Yes, and I just want to say thank you as well, for your time and for this fascinating conversation.